Hello.
Hey John, how's it going?
Hi.
Hey guys. I
Hi.
You can hear me and see me.
Yeah,
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. I am so sorry about this morning. I
That's all right. Not
not
a
at
problem
all.
at all.
seriously, like, this homeschooling thing is
So what's it like over there then? So
excuse
is
me.
are you homeschooling because of COVID? Is that the reason at the
Yeah.
moment?
I mean, we've got COVID. So because of COVID, homeschooling, now we've got all these fires. I don't know if you've been hearing about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And like, we literally just moved from California where most of the fires have been happening.
yeah.
Just up north to Washington, which has now got the highest, unhealthy air quality index due to the fires
Oh,
here. And
man.
I mean, obviously we're blessed we didn't have to evacuate,
Yeah,
but it's crazy.
yeah. I can
We
imagine. We're seeing it on the news over here and trying to actually contemplate it because we're such a wet island where it just rains constantly.
Yeah,
Trying to
yeah,
contemplate like a wildfire is just like completely like something that we just can't even like imagine.
yeah. It's so hard. Yeah, we're dealing with it, but yeah, still, I was anytime I schedule something for like right around their school time, I was like, oh my gosh, I completely blank. So again, I'm sorry for that.
No,
No,
that's all right.
not
I
at
mean,
all.
we really appreciate you joining us today. I mean, basically what we've been doing is we used to talk about sports every week and everything got shut down. So we've been going through all our favorite comedies of our lifetimes. We were 94, so Napoleon Dynamite was right one, particularly for us too. So obviously no better person to speak to than the man behind the magic.
All right. I like that. I like that natural segue from sports to comedy movies.
I mean, we had to find something with nothing going on, so it works out quite nicely.
Yeah.
So we essentially we know that you did like a short film prior to Napoleon Dynamite, and
Yeah.
we wondered what kind of outline was given to you in terms of the character because it's quite a specific character to portray. So we didn't know if that was written down and you had quite a specific brief to follow, or if it was just something that you came up with and then it snowballed into what we see in Napoleon Dynamite.
I think, yeah, you're right. Like, it all, the genesis of it all was with the short film. And Jared Hess, who, created the whole thing, he was a student we were both students at the same time at university. And we were just in similar classes. And I think with this kind of a project, when the short film was it was a class project. So it was an assignment that you got graded on. But so, I mean, the only thing there is to lose is your grade, but, really it's a total kind of a workshop piece. He had an idea, Jared early on had a voice. He had a voice he wanted to express. He came from this small town, Preston, Idaho, and he just always had an eye and an ear for the weird kind of really, at the risk of saying quirky, I want to say crusty. Just these crusty little weird characters in small towns, particularly his small town where he grew up.
Yeah.
And he had made this short film. It was called, oh man, what was it called? I got to figure it out.
Paluca?
No. Peluca is the one I did, but even before
Right.
Peluca, he made the short film with his brother, just riding around on a bike in Preston, Idaho. It was like really, really simple. And I just remember seeing it and thinking, okay, he has a visual eye. He's just capturing like a raw element of this kind of weird small town and just things about life that have no serious impact. It's just more little anecdotes of life and visual anecdotes. I think the short film that he made had no dialogue, and it was something that caught my attention. So when he approached me about the script, I first read it. And in the script, knowing Jared and reading the script and just kind of hearing the voice kind of in my head and a little bit like, it was almost at the same time as reading the script, Jared just said, hey, those kind of kids. And that's really how it all started. It was like, those kind of kids are like, oh, these are worse. They're so retarded. And he kind of just did his little version of it. And in the second he did that, And then I read the script. I was just like, yeah, I know exactly who this character is. I think he was just hoping that we kind of saw, I think he saw that I had done one other student film that I had acted in.
Yeah.
But also, I guess, just kind of how I walked around and how I carried myself, and just kind of I don't know if it was something about my cadence, but he was just like, I think Jon might get this, and I think he might, because to him, he was like, it's whoever I get to portray this character, they've got to get it. Because he had another kid in mind, actually, in the beginning, who was kind of the real deal, but he couldn't really act like himself. He wasn't an actor.
Yeah.
He couldn't really portray himself, and so he didn't get it. So he was like, Jon, I think if you understand this and you have a little bit of that, standing on the other side of camera kind of perspective, because I was a film student, so I kind of got it. So he was just hoping, and it was just kind of like stars aligned. I was like, I 100% know this character. I know what you're trying to do. And yeah, as we kind of talked about him and we went to the thrift store and we started picking out his outfit, that's kind of when he started to become fleshed out. I remember specifically, should he wear glasses? Yeah, let's give him some weird glasses that like make his eyes look tiny. And I think he's just always like annoyed and just and just breathing. He's a mouth breather. And then he came up with the right there on the spot. He was just like, let's put him in some moon boots. I think he just thinks those are really utilitarian and awesome. So that's kind of that's really kind of how it all started.
Because that's something we're really like interested to find out, to see how much of you was shining through as Napoleon, or if it was like completely cast, or if it was like improvised a little bit. How much of you was shining through there?
Well, I think so. I related greatly to the character when I read the first short script, but then I read the feature script. I was like, oh my gosh, Jared, it's like, I don't remember if I told him stories and he incorporated them in, but like, the whole scene where, Napoleon's just talking about, like, I already made like affinity of those boondoggle keychains at scout camp. Yeah. I was like, yeah, I did. As a kid, I was at scout camp and I made boondoggle keychains. I made homemade nunchucks. So many kids do that anyways, but him and I were raised in such a similar, I came from the same church and we had very similar backgrounds. We were both raised in scouts and we both had younger brothers. And that was a big key because so much of Napoleon, I saw myself, but I also saw my younger brothers because Napoleon kind of acts like always the kid who's crapped on by his older brothers, or just thinks the whole world is always unfair to them. And so when I certainly saw that, but I also saw the difference being, here's a kid who's kind of like, his reaction and his nuances is very similar to myself. However, he was probably raised in a household where his parents didn't, take care of him the way, as we see, he was raised by his grandma. They just go shopping at the thrift store. My parents were a little bit more affluent. So they, we had stuff, but I hung in that world and I knew that world of like kids who just don't care or don't realize, or their world, they just don't realize, like wearing moon boots every day is normal. And it's like, he thinks that's normal, like completely fine. And just like, you just get the job done and you're fine. So there's a little bit of, it wasn't so much a disconnect. It's like taking the next step for me. I'm like, now I just throw those on and I'm like, I know who this kid is.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think as well, like you've touched on before as well, where you said that Jared Hess grew up in Preston, Idaho. And how was that like an actual projection of what it was like in a small town in America growing up? Was it those kind of characters, those kind of people, and you kind of just put them all together into one film? Or did you kind of like think of all the other extra characters that are there as well?
I think what was his benefit was that he decided, like, he really just honed in on that town, Preston, Idaho. But I think in his mind he knew when he was a student and he had planned, because he was just leaving college as he directed his first, I think he was still in college, but he knew when I make my first feature, I'm going to make it this. I've got to be as true as I can to this world, because he knows it's also going to be a blanket for like a portrayal of so many other small towns. Is it exactly like every single small town? Not necessarily, but it's the same idea. You know, really kind of weird characters are a little bit of out of touch with reality, because they live in a small town. They don't, you know, they have internet, they have certain trends and fashions, but everything's a little late. You know, it gets there literally, you know, physically, you know, shipments get there later than the rest of the country.
Yeah.
They don't see, you know, it's a kind of a farming town. So FFA was big there. They just, and it's not at all slight. It's just the disconnect from, you know, the hustle and bustle of the real world and pop culture. And again, you know, just cultural trends are just take a little bit longer to get there. And that's most typical small towns. But, you know, again, instead of trying to just grab ideas from lots of little small towns that he took and tried to make it one, he was like, we'll capture that essence, but it's still like, this is Preston. If you go visit Preston, Idaho, that's what it looks like. That's because we shot it there, and the same places, the same, you know, locations are like, yeah, that's the high school. That's the thing. This is my personal experiences growing up, but I feel like, you know, other people will be able to relate to it. That's me speaking for Jared, knowing that's kind of what he was shooting for.
Yeah.
And hoping that people will relate to it, because while I didn't grow up in that small of a town, you know, I had been around and been through small towns. I knew kids like that. So yeah, I mean, that's certainly kind of what we were trying to capture.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just on IMDb kind of trivia, that kind of thing you see on there. So they say that you originally paid $1,000 for the role. So, I mean, could you believe then, I mean, it goes on to gross 46 million worldwide. It could ever be as big as it was while you were filming it?
We didn't know. I mean, sometimes I want to say like we always kind of knew something would happen, but it's weird. Like most of my life, it's been a success. I mean, there's only like a year where it wasn't a success when we made it. So it's hard to go back and try to really remember. Yeah. But I do. I remember thinking, this has a potential. Like, this is so different. And when I read the script, I was like, this is a nerd film. This is a film about the underdog, about the weirdo kid in high school. We don't have a lot of those. We have Revenge of the Nerds, which doesn't really, it's not very realistic. It was like, you know, the pocket protector, taped up glass look, and like it was a cartoon version of Nerds. And there wasn't a lot of nerd films to really, you know, kind of bring, herald the way for us. So I remember thinking, this is unique. It's kind of one of a kind, but if it's also really capturing that, like, this is the weirdo underdog high school, but it was also innocent enough and simple enough where it's something that I knew audiences could, like, there's nothing hidden here. There's no darkness to this film. There's a couple moments here there where you're like, is Uncle Rico really gonna do that? Or is, what's going on behind the curtains? But it's pretty much all out there for you to see. So it really was a very simple snapshot of this kind of world. And yeah, when we were all making it, we all thought, oh my gosh, they could totally, I remember thinking like of all the possibilities, they could totally make, you know, talking dolls or action figures that has all our one-liners, because we believe that. That said, the biggest thing to remember, it was an independent film, and it was completely independent. We had no studio, we had nobody. It was just us. So we just thought, well, how do you get, you know, back then, before you have social media and stuff like that, you're just not sure how you're going to get this film exposed and people to see this film. So really, it was just like, yeah, we'll probably play in a few film festivals, which will be great. And I would think some film festival audiences will get the weirdness. They'll appreciate it. Is it for the masses? I don't know if the masses will ever care because it's mostly unknown actors, and it's very specific, and yet. So I honestly thought, like, I don't know if kids are ever going to care about this. I think it's going to be the indie crowd that might like this if they see it. So I was taken by surprise when it was just. When people really started, like, everybody, kids and teenagers. While it's a film about teenagers, I honestly did not think teenagers were really going to get it or really going to appreciate it. And I don't think they did at first. It was almost like once MTV kind of put their sticker on it, then, but that's not giving kids credit. I mean, generations have passed, and in some ways it has just become a part of pop culture. So maybe it's okay now. If kids were introduced to this, if this was introduced to kids without, Fox and MTV connected, would they appreciate it? I would think so, yes, because again, I've had, anywhere from 8-year-olds to 4-year-olds, and people saying, "Oh yeah, my 3-year-old quotes this movie."
Yeah.
And they don't get the whole, cultural pressure and understanding of, like, oh, it's, if they think it's cool, then it must be cool. They're so honest. And so, I guess we grab something that people seem to get.
Definitely, because it's like our experiences with Napoleon Dynamite. Obviously, it came out in 2004. We'd just kind of gone to secondary school. You'd go around to like a mate's house, you put the DVD on. It was like, before we really knew what MTV or anything like that was, before we didn't have any like cable contracts or anything like that, put the DVD on, and it was just quoting lines constantly to each other at school, outside of school. And I guess you're right, it captures that innocence of, if they love it for what it is, then that's how it becomes so cult, I imagine.
Yeah. And I think it also, especially for so many ages, young people, your non-indie goers, your non-indie film people, just your general audiences, and like, so, just the working man, the young high schoolers, for them, I think they felt like this is an art piece and this is an indie film. Like, whoa, I think they liked the idea. Part of the attraction was like, here's a film that isn't filled with special effects, that isn't based on a Marvel character, that has no recognizable stars. Like, so it feels like an indie film, but I like it. And so they felt like an ownership there. Like, so many people, when they first saw it, they thought they were the only ones who discovered it. Because when the way Fox rolled it out in theaters was genius. They just put it in a couple really small theaters around the country. And every week they would add, every week or every other week, they would add it to a few more theaters. But they did it just enough so that people who went and saw it, there wasn't a lot of ads or anything. They just, so many people have, approached me and told me, like, oh yeah, I just went to the theater, go see a movie, and it was either sold out. So then I was like, what is this weird looking movie? Like, oh, go check it out. And to them, they're like, this is my discovery. They're all gold. It's like they're all discovering, not to use the word gold, but it's like, it's that feeling that we've all felt like when you discover something new that you want to share with everybody else. Like, and everybody felt like they were the first ones, which was, it works. It's perfect for any small film, because you want everybody to do that, because then they're sharing it. That's how we became a movie. They went and they shared it with their friends and their family, and they kept taking new groups. Everybody was watching it over and over, and then they bought it on DVD. And like, if you haven't seen this, you got to come see it. And I think that was a huge attraction, because it gave them almost, it made them feel like they had some credit, of like, hey, I like, it makes me feel, I don't know if it made them feel smarter, or they just like, hey, this is cool. This is an indie film. And this is, I've never seen a film like it. And a lot of times it's just simply, I've never seen a film like it. It's dumb and it's simple to follow, but instead of being your typical Hollywood comedy that's dumb and simple to follow, or, action film where it's just, I just want some like kind of dead zone brain fodder that I can just kind of put on in the background. This was kind of the same thing, but it made him feel a little bit like, oh, this was in the indie theater.
Yeah.
So I must be watching something good.
Yeah.
It seems like we've never seen anyone with really any kind of mixed feelings on it. It's either some people really don't like it, they don't get it, or other people, if you love the film, you really do go all in. You do love the film properly. So I guess that kind of helps as much because
it is. I mean,
people are more likely to see.
It is a polarizing film because it's so specific that it's like, if you either get it and you love it, or not to say that people who don't love it don't get it. I'm sure there are people who get it, but they're just like, either they grew up in that world and they're just like, I don't want anything to do with that, or it's just stupid. They're like, it's not for them, and that happens. And what's great is most of the time those people don't approach me, so so I don't really know about it.
Yeah,
it's in the way that it's kind of like snowboarding. You said about like their action figures and things, and I think there's a Nintendo DS game, there's a PSP game for Napoleon Dynamite. You got on to have the cartoon series, which shame we didn't get more of that, but it really did. You've got just about everything, and more than you would get for films that have probably made a lot more money, but they don't have the specific fan base for it. Yeah,
it was. When we did the cartoon, that really made me realize, like, we set up a world and like a world of characters and a bubble of characters that it was so natural when we made that cartoon, the animated series. I was bummed that we only did, and I don't know, I mean, what could it have kept going? I mean,
if 10 million people tuned in for the first episode.
Yeah, I mean, if people thought that, a lot of people I remember saying this could be like the next King of the Hill, where it is about like small town, but even smaller. Because at the time I was like, well, if you were in the real Preston, you'd be like, how could you make a cartoon series based on this place? There's nobody here. There's like nobody, but they did it for the cartoon. And I remember thinking they could make this work. We could do a number of seasons in this world. And it worked so well because we got the same actors to do the voices, with a few other really good voiceover actors to kind of fill in all the other kind of ancillary roles. But it really worked out nicely, but it made us realize, this is a world, a bubble of characters that we've created, that you could do an animated show, you could do a live action show, you could do a comic book series, you could do all kinds of stuff. That's to say, not tons else has been done. I mean, I know there's been official fans or unofficial fans who've made some comic books, but I tell a lot of people, I don't think the world of Napoleon is ever dead. You never know what may happen. Maybe, who knows? I mean, they've made sequels to movies 30 years after. Who knows?
Dumb and Dumber, over 20 years after Dumb and Dumber sequel came out.
Exactly.
This is probably the longest I'm sure you've spoken about Napoleon Dynamite with anyone bringing up the dance. Hopefully that when people see you in public, they're not asking you to do that out there. But was that always to canned heat? Because judging by the budget that's stated, you've got quite a good soundtrack for the film that I'd imagine wasn't easy to get alongside it. No,
there was the initial budget that we had, the shooting budget, and kind of even the post-production budget. So I think the way it went is, when we made it, the director was like, I don't know what music we're going to be able to get. Music is especially for indie films, is half the budget. Yeah. It's just getting the rights to music. And, a lot of directors, and, I know exactly how they feel. They want their specific music.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't care, but, it's like music makes so much, and it can be so expensive to either have it written or have it already produced. So anyways, when we did the show, I know that, for most of the rest of the movie, he was like, well, I'll get what I can get. I'll try to get a composer. But for the dance scene, he was like, we both were like, he came to me saying, look, I don't know what we're going to get the rights to. So I think what we're just going to have to do is just dance to music, whatever we like, And then if we can get the rights, great. If we find another song, because I remember thinking like we can edit it around. We can edit it in a way where it can kind of follow any song. It doesn't have to be right on, and that will create part of the crustiness. We're like, we want the dance to be cool, but not too cool.
Yeah.
So we actually did dance. I mean, him and I both loved Jamiroquai at the time, and we were like, it was just weird. We just both loved it. That was the song that I did 3 takes. I danced to that song. I danced to another Jamiroquai song. I danced to a Michael Jackson song, I think. Because we were like, well, let's change it up just a little bit, just in case. And then, after, I think there's, the way indie films work, they were able to get like the initial festival rights for the music. So they didn't have to shell out as much money, with the stipulation, like, if this ever gets distributed and purchased, you're going to have to pay more. And that's when Fox came in. They laid down the rest of the money to pay for the rights of all the music. So Jared got, exactly what he wanted, which was great,
Awesome. I think going back to kind of like the character of Napoleon as a whole, so all of the comments that he makes, like under his breath when people walk away, things like that, is that you ad-libbing or is that planned? Did you ever kind of do anything different in the script? It just was gold, so you kept it.
It was most of it was just gold. Most of the script was really like every word was just like, okay, I want to like perform it. It's like a dance. Yeah. And most of the actors will tell you like this is the kind of comedy where you don't want to get out there and ruin it with ad-lib. Because Jared wrote it really well. Each of these lines are their own character. And instead of messing up, all the before and after of each line, you just let the line breathe and be its own thing. And it's a total testament to how well it works because people love quoting the movie. They quote it. Yeah. And those lines wouldn't be what they are if we had just rambled and just started kind of coming up. Granted, whenever you're acting, you're always ad-libbing your actions, and a director might be very specific about how you move and how you deliver it. But for sure, there's little moments where you just like kind of you're saying a line, and you have to fill every frame with something. And while that film is filled with subtlety, and Jared wanted a lot of just kind of like you're looking, just like. Looking, thinking, and then it's just breathing. And each of those moments was really kind of like either thought out or just take your time, think about it. But it was a simple time, and Jared would be kind of like, all right, so you're looking at it and you're just like, and he would do the breath. He would be like, just go, oh, okay. And then so I would do it, and kind of do my version. There wasn't a lot of ad-libbing.
No.
Yeah.
And I guess as well, like the lack of swearing in the film, like makes the film to me 10 times funnier. Like all of the little sayings that it says, all of the little quips, but no swearing. Was that something like consciously that you guys wanted to do, or is it just how it played out?
No, it was. Kind of both. It just played out naturally that way. We're, Jared himself, myself, again, both being very religious and just growing up in that kind of environment. We both grew up in this similar environment where, our parents didn't use language, so we didn't, and we're encouraged, but we would come up with our own version, butt nugget, bodaggett, freaking, just kind of say these things, and there's a whole culture of that all over America and probably other parts of the world maybe, but I don't know if they have that in England, if they have people like soft language that's like meant to sound like oh you freaking idiot or you and
like there is to a degree, but I think kids just swear from like a really young age. It's just,
and they do here too.
Yeah,
and they do here too. It just really, again, it just kind of depends on where you grew up and what kind of household you're raised in. And again, we grew up very similar, and so it was just being true to like who we were, especially Jared. He was like, this is just how I was raised, and so I didn't. But I think for sure, so often having gone to film school with those kind of parameters, I always felt like, having those restrictions, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, always was a great vehicle for promoting creativity.
Definitely.
And these lines wouldn't be these lines if you cuss, you use certain language. Yeah, someday, we say it so often because it's about the emotion and how it's, portrayed, but we've heard that all before 100,000 times. Let's bring in something different. And it's hard. It's, typically, it's just all the kind of comedy. This is the kind of comedy Jared wanted to portray, that we wanted to portray, that was different. It's giving you a slice of life that you just don't know.
Definitely. I guess that just makes it funnier as well, because you hear the swear words everywhere all the time, in the movies, whereas to hear some of the lines that you came out with in Napoleon Dynamite, you just never heard before. And that's what makes the film so great.
When you get approached, is there something in particular that people say to you or want you to say, or anything that you get all the time?
Well, the number one line is easily, "Tina, you fat lard." I don't know. And that was always, very quickly I discovered that. And honestly, that was a surprise. Because when we kind of used to talk about while we were making the film, a little bit after, we were like, what are going to be, people are going to be just quoting, gosh, idiot, and yes, they do quote those for sure. But I just thought, even some of the longer, I'm trying to think of some just lines. Most of the time lines are quoted from films because we find a moment in our life to use it. That makes sense, right? We'll say lucky, and then you're repeat yourself, lucky. And you're just it can apply itself to that situation. So when people started coming up and just saying, "Tina, you fat lard," and I'm like, what? Why is that the number one quote? That doesn't make any sense. I don't know what situation you would use that line in unless you had a friend or a pet named Tina who was fat and it was dinner time. And yet people say, oh, that's the number one, we quote that all the time. We just yell it out. And I'm like, well, sometimes we just quote the lines because we just like them.
Yeah.
And they don't have to make sense in any way. But one of my favorite lines, and that doesn't get uttered as much, but kind of calling back to your talk about language, was just when he goes, "Why don't you go eat a decrepit piece of crap?" And it's I remember at the time I was like, Jared, no, this isn't a word, correct? He's like, no. He was I don't even think this is a real word. He's like, no, this just sounds, it's exactly like when he just it just sounds like something Napoleon would have heard somewhere, but then he kind of, without realizing, he changed it. It sounds offensive, it sounds scientific and smart, but it also sounds like you're really just digging at a decrepit piece of what does that mean? I think I know. Is that fossilized piece of crud that is turned and hard and just lethal? I don't know.
So when writing these lines, did you kind of all pitch in, or is it all Jared, or how did you kind of come up with some of the really unique lines?
It was mostly Jared and his wife. Jared just kind of picked a lot of these lines up from his childhood, things that his brothers said, and because so much of it is stuff that happened to him and his family growing up. But his brothers worked at a chicken farm. I think they worked at that chicken farm, and they would get home and they'd be pissed because they'd be like, "What? $1 an hour? Whatever? That's stupid," And so he kind of worked in those lines. I'm pretty sure he heard one of his brothers say a decrepit piece of crap once, so he put that in. So a lot of it was just kind of remembering things.
Yeah.
And just hearing kids say go in Peluca, one of my favorite lines is, "Randy, go find your grandma or something. You're bugging the heck out of me." Gosh. And it's just that was just like, yeah, everybody lived with their grandmas. Like a lot of times you had kids who were just raised by grandparents. It's like, go find your grandma, okay? Just quit bugging me. Like, what does that mean? It's funny, but and I think, by the time he wrote the feature, him and I were hanging out a bit, and we had done the short. So just little things that I would say and stuff I would tell him my brothers said.
Yeah.
And also, again, so Aaron Rule, who plays Kip, him and I were like the only two guys that were like his school buddies who he knew at school. And Kip's character was based on Aaron Rule's younger brother, because Aaron would tell him stories about his younger brother. Dude, you don't understand. My brother did this. His brother actually bought a time machine online. And so he would tell him these stories and things he would say, just really TO'd right now. And it was that kind of stuff he would tell him. And so again, it was just collections of what people would say.
Yeah.
As an actor, to have such like an iconic role, so I mean, almost anything you do is going to be that's Napoleon Dynamite. Is it? Do you mind that, or is it something that is just you're used to it now?
Well, yeah, I'm used to it. I mean, I literally right before this, I was like, yeah, honey, I'm going to do a podcast talking about yet again Napoleon Dynamite. And I think about that, and of course, it's one in a kind. I mean, obviously, there's been lots of actors who had their first thing out was something that was a cult. When you think of a character that looks so different and is just so memorable in that way, it's always hard to break free. But there have been a number of actors who've done that. I've tried. I've done other films. Anything that's hugely successful that's so different. It's like I try to do stuff that's more like me, natural version of myself. Whereas Napoleon was like, well, it's kind of me, but I also had a perm and moon boots and glasses. So, I'm always trying to find, whatever that new thing is.
Yeah.
Which would really suck, if I didn't like the movie. And I love the movie, and I'm very proud of it. And it's such a memorable and such a special occurrence in my, not just I wouldn't call it an occurrence. It changed my life.
Yeah.
But it was such a wonderful thing. I guess it was an occurrence, like to see it from the beginning, this film that we loved, these characters that we loved, and then to see it become what it became, and everybody else loving it. And it's always like, that's as a filmmaker, what you want. And as a creator, as an artist, you want that people to connect to your art. You want them. Some people don't, but we weren't doing this in our emo closets, just like, oh, I just want to, create something that only we get. I remember thinking, man, if I'm the only one if nobody else likes this, at least I'll have a copy of it on DVD.
Yeah.
And I'll be fine. But no, I mean, this is like a dream come true for these kind of films. And so it's always a reminder of, it's a great boost.
Yeah. There's so much,
There's
so much gold in the film. We wondered if there was anything that didn't make it to the film that you thought was really great that you filmed, or if literally everything you made did end up in the final cut.
No, there was some stuff. I mean, number one, I always tell people, go watch the short film, Peluca, because it's really good. I love that. I love Peluca. And it's mostly, while it has kind of the same story, what does he do? Does he help his friend out? But it's all like different lines and different moments. And so that's kind of, we actually shot most of those scenes for the film. There's a whole side story of how he gets the money to help to get his suit and to get the wig for Pedro.
Yeah.
And so we shot most of those scenes exactly as we shot it in Peluca. And I think they realized, it was weird. It made the film a little bit longer.
Yeah.
He realized he didn't need it. And so I'm fine. There was I think most of the cut stuff is is fine. I can't imagine. There's a scene where he does catch the bass. You know, he says, "I caught you a delicious bass." There's a whole scene before that where it shows him fishing for the bass, and he finds one that's too small, so he like drop kicks it back into the lake. And that was funny, but you know, it's weird to think of the movie as any different than it is today.
Yeah.
Like there's a kickball scene. There's a big kickball scene that was probably the chunkiest thing that was cut from the film that we talk about. But you know, if you watch it, it kind of makes sense. It's still fun to watch because it's in that world. But it's number one. I don't know if this art director screwed up because kickball, you normally use like a ball that's about like that big.
Yeah.
And instead they had a ball. You can't even see. It was gigantic. I was like, it was just silly, almost silly to the point like this is so unrealistic. Like who plays kickball with this? And plus it shows kind of like it shows Napoleon being a jerk to Don, and it kind of makes you like, he's a little. We didn't want to dislike the character too much. There's definitely moments of Napoleon you're like, okay, he's a punk, but you didn't want to do that too much, so they cut that.
Another question I'm sure you get quite a bit is, has there ever been anything close to a sequel coming? Because for a film as well loved as it is, it's surprising that it's never gone that far, because you can almost get a sequel for everything these days, and so that's one that we just haven't got around to seeing.
Well, because I think most of the time, especially with films like that, you really have to look to the director, the people who created it. If it was a studio film from the beginning, then they probably would have made a sequel right away. And while they own the rights, so they could. I mean, Fox all this time, I think the rights actually finally I can't remember, but I know all this time Fox could have made a sequel, but I think they always knew, and it shows like some respectable restraint on their part. They're like, nobody would care about a sequel if we didn't get the original actors and the same voice and the same feel.
Yeah.
So it would not just the actors, but we'd have to get Jared to, write something and direct it. And I mean, you really had to get all the same people. And so, Jared was just always interested in doing other projects. There's been very slight whispers in the wind, echoes, if you will, where, there's like maybe a sequel, or people saying, hey, maybe we could do a sequel, but nothing has ever been set in stone. I think I'm not saying that, I think if it was approached in the right way, done very differently than your typical sequel, it's hard because most sequels, most high school movies are about kids, and so when you do a sequel to a kids movie and your kids are all grown up, then it's like, well, then you have to completely approach it like this is a different movie. It's like, because it's all sweet and innocent when they're like in school, because they're not adults, they don't have responsibilities, there's a freedom there. But now once they're adults and the world is much more grim, and you see the world through a different lens. And so I'm not saying it's impossible, you just have to approach it in a very different way.
How would you if you could kind of choose how to make the sequel, how would you do it?
If I did it, it would probably be real time. You wouldn't try to pick up like, oh, this is senior year instead of junior year. It'd be real time, so everybody would be older. But it would be darker in still an innocent way. You still want to capture that innocent vibe. Like it wouldn't be like it's about murder or suicide or anything too dark, but it would be like dealing with a few more mature adult problems. But doing it in a way like, because you're right, you're like, who would the audience be? The original audience who saw it when they were younger, and now they can relate to more of these things because they're like, are you trying to capture, Napoleon captures the innocence of youth. Well, what would this be? The innocence of naivety? This is the innocence of, there's definitely going to be some innocence lost, but it's also like, could still be a portrait, a look at like sweet characters who are still like good at their core.
Mhm.
But I don't want to give it all away, what I would do.
Yeah, keep some of it.
Yeah.
Yes, just finally, we've spoken about Napoleon Dynamite, but obviously you've done a lot more than Napoleon Dynamite. I particularly like bench warmers, and I know Jack likes Blades of Glory a lot, and I didn't know if you have a particular favourite project that you've done, or what was the most fun to film, because you've done some quite different things.
I mean, man, I loved working on pretty much all those. I mean, Napoleon was probably the most fun to shoot, but I mean, like Blades of Glory was so completely different. Such a different, I mean, it's a bigger budget, it's a studio film. And what I loved most about that, obviously, was working with Will Ferrell, who was great. I mean, this guy was funny, and it was just like, it was just great to work with him and to be able to say you work with him. But also just doing a big studio movie about this weird world of ice skating. And I really liked ice skating. I loved the idea of, like, it made me feel like a professional actor. Like, you're coming in, you're learning a skill. We had to take training, and we had to learn the choreography and really work hard and slim down and get somewhat in shape. And so it really felt like a work piece. So it was a very different experience. It was fun in a grueling kind of a way.
Yeah.
And then Benchwarmers was a ton of fun to make, because on the opposite end, we didn't have to work out, we didn't have to train, we didn't have to be good at anything. And we was just hanging out on set, but because it was a studio film, you know, we had amazing catering. We had amazing everything. It was just, and the guys were just great to work with. You know, just hang out in between sets while they're setting it up. We'd either play baseball, we'd play hacky sack, we'd just mess around. Yeah. Everybody was just really cool and easy and laid back. And so that was a ton of fun to make. I mean, they were all fun.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Well, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
and,
no problem.
Yeah, hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, guys. And this was fun. And again, sorry about the time change, but
no problem at all.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Goodbye.
See you guys.
Bye.